Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. A real pleasure to be with you here in beautiful Marrakech.
Yeah.
Obviously presenting your most recent film, The Order. I guess just by way of introduction, can you give us a bit of a synopsis? What can people expect when they go in to watch it?
Well, it was a bit of a throwback in terms of genre films that I really loved in the 70s. Those sort of American films like French Connection and films that Sidney Lumet and William Friedkin kind of directed. That was sort of where I started to sort of fall in love with film. And it's based on a true story of a series of heists that were really quite large and big in America in the 80s. The FBI agents sort of discovered that these heists were actually funding America's first homegrown terrorist group called The Order, who were sort of plotting through this book, The Turner Diaries, to overthrow the American government. So it's a period film, but obviously it's sort of still pretty kind of relevant and has a particular conversation to today.
Had the pleasure of speaking to Jude Law actually just before I came out here, and it was so fascinating to hear from him, how he came across the material, but he'd seen Nitram and thought that you were the perfect person to direct the film, because he's obviously on board as producer and as lead actor. What does that mean to you, to be approached and to know someone's seen your work and thinks you're the right person to work on something?
Well, it's very helpful for directors to have actors that want to work with you. Like that's that's really important, especially at the moment. But I was just a huge fan of Jude's, and I was really desperate to work with him. But we had some conversations about this particular character, and it became really clear it was sort of something that he felt, a character he felt he hadn't done before, and there was something kind of quite unique and a kind of energy there for him that could be really exciting. And I think when you get on set an actor that you can feel there's an anxiety there and there's a nervousness about doing something that feels like they haven't done before. That's always a really nice place to be.
And how much did you know about this movement? I mean, I didn't even know it existed, this neo-Nazi movement, back in the 80s, and the fact that it really did kind of get so much traction and was, that book has sort of become this Bible, as we read there at the end, even as recently with the Capitol riots. So did you kind of have to go and immerse yourself in more and do a lot of research, or you could just work straight on the script? Where did you begin?
Yeah, I was just reading the script and sort of got to page 15 and, suddenly realised, oh my God, this is a true story. And, it's a series of events that really kind of weren't so reported. They kind of went under the radar a little. But I was just, January 6th happened and we'd started sort of working on the next draft of the script, and I'm sort of starting to see sort of images of, Day of the Rope and some other sort of chapters in the Turner Diaries and people kind of reading it. And it suddenly became, very clear that this was a particular story that, was important. I had being Australian, no sort of understanding or recollection of the Order and the Turner Diaries and even the assassination of Alan Berg was very new to me.
Do you feel like you perhaps got an aptitude for, or you gravitate towards telling these sort of true crime stories, and you've got maybe a specific style? I feel like, talking about genre films where everything's quite kind of understated, and even sort of the action scenes and the heists, nothing is melodramatic. So what would you say your filmmaking style is, and what do you think that approach does to the way you want to tell your story?
I think I feel most comfortable and I'm sort of at my best when there's a world that's sort of grounded, and I guess I kind of gravitate towards true stories, and when there's that sort of level of research and kind of character, and you're really trying to get under sort of real events, that's when I sort of feel probably most excited, and then how you can bring a point of view to true events, is really interesting to me. But it's definitely over the last sort of couple of films have been, much more leaning in towards some, events that may have happened or stories that have been untold, and yeah, and working with writers that, you know, are excited about that sort of thing as well.
I guess even though ostensibly it, you know, sits in that kind of action, true crime, thriller genre, it's very much a character-driven film. And I sort of love the fact that you sort of have, you know, in both Terry and Bob, kind of these leaders that you kind of make a parallel between them. Obviously, they're on completely opposite ends of this moral spectrum, but both really complex, interesting characters. And you kind of see in Nicholas's Bob how seductive and it can be, you know, to have a leader like that, and how, you know, understand how people can be radicalized through that character. So what was it like putting those two against each other, and particularly seeing how Jude and Nicholas create that dynamic?
Yeah, it was. Look, it's really fascinating because Bob, in a sense, is always surrounded by people. You know, he always has a sort of community around him, and he sort of, I mean, he has two families in the film. So, that was a particular dynamic that was complete opposite to Husk, Jude's character, that was an outlier. He was sort of, you know, not from the town. He kind of drives into this car like a Western, and he sort of, you know, spends most of his time quite isolated and alone and without family. So I found that dynamic instantly kind of interesting. And then the two of them, I think they have one scene sort of together where they have this sort of interaction where one doesn't know the other. And yeah, it was really fascinating. We kind of played around with that a little bit, where Jude and Nick sort of wouldn't speak to each other, and, you know, were kind of kept quite separate, and the crew were sort of all in on it. And, you know, it was all a bit of fun, but they were treating it completely seriously, and it did bring a kind of, you know, attention to that dynamic between those characters. And you know, and then on that day where they sort of met and they finished the scene, that they both kind of dropped their accents and hugged each other and asked about the kids, and, you know, you kind of like, oh wow, they've been kind of like faithful to this all the way, you know, through most of the shooting. And I love that. Like, it's little things like that I do feel you see on screen. I certainly do when I'm sort of directing. I think that there's a kind of ownership that the actors have with some of those little exercises that I think kind of are important in terms of grounding something.
And I was going to say that because both of them are sort of like very quintessentially British,
Yeah.
and then they're in this incredibly American environment. So was that also a thing, like having to stay in the accents and stay in that world, you know, sort of like
No, they'd
breaking into banter. And
yeah, they'd occasionally they'd sort of shock me on set when they'd sort of turn into their kind of natural accents, and these kind of two British boys, you know, sitting around, you know, in this sort of Americana kind of world. But yeah, I've never really. My film Nitram had Caleb Landry Jones playing an Australian character, so I've always been, you know, I've never sort of felt as though a passport was important to the character. It's always been, you know, who just feels right, and, you know, and who's someone that I, you know, are really excited to work with.
And you do have, you know, your fair share of like propulsive action scenes. Particularly, I love that high scene, the one that's like, you know, on the road,
On the highway, yeah.
On the highway. What's it like pulling those things off? Is that something that you really relish in?
We didn't have a huge amount of resources or days to kind of do the film, so we had to be very, very precise about it. But I really enjoyed. I had an amazing cinematographer, Adam Arkapour, who we sat down and planned like little cars and little kind of sort of setups, and we'd have these sort of matches, and, you know, the whole aim was, you know, how would we do this with single camera? Like, where did the camera kind of want to be for these action sequences? So rather than shooting with 4 cameras and then finding it in the edit, it was really about making choices before we filmed to bring an energy, but also, most importantly, a sort of point of view as to how to watch these particular sequences, which, you know, I really loved. It had a very kind of classic feel about it, and Adam was really wanting to explore.
And in terms of the takeaways, I mean, even though it's set in the 80s, there's obviously some clear resonances to a contemporary audience. You know, why do you think it's important to perhaps look at, you know, why is it so many, particularly young white men, are sort of gravitating towards this kind of like far right sort of, end of things. Should we be doing more to stop that happening? And there's also a lot in there about masculinity. And I wonder if there is, some common thread with a few of your films, right? I don't think there's not always that neat redemption arc, There's failure there, and, perhaps we don't see that on screen enough.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think they're really valid questions about why are people seeking answers in these sort of ideologies at the moment. Why are young men searching for those answers? What are they being told, or what is happening in their own lives, and how do they feel about themselves? What are those role models that are around them? I think they're all really valid questions that I'm particularly kind of curious about. I think we're living in a really kind of uncertain time, and I think there's a lot of kind of conversation to be sort of had about why people are sort of searching for answers in some pretty kind of horrible ideologies. So there's sort of many questions there that I don't think this film's going to completely answer, but it's definitely a kind of conversation piece, and that's the great thing about film, is it can take you to those kind of shadows and start to explore them a bit more.
And what did it mean to you to have the film playing last night here at Marrakech
Oh, it was
Film
great.
Festival?
Like, it's been, I've been here sort of 3 times now, and the first film, Snowtown, played at the festival amongst other first and second time filmmakers, and it sort of feels a bit like a bit of a full circle. And I'm really, this is really a very, very important festival in terms of cinema. In terms of a friend to film, and how auteurs are really kind of celebrated, and filmmakers are held in a real high regard. So it's a wonderful thing to be around, and it's very it's very humbling, and I'm very honoured that it played here.
Did it feel funny to know you got Luca and Jacob and everyone sitting there watching your film?
Well, it is an extraordinary festival in you do find yourself at a bar or having a coffee, and you're surrounded by some of the best filmmakers in the world, and they're just there, and everyone's kind of talking about each other's work. There is something special about this place that sort of brings together some pretty amazing minds, especially in film. So and this year's no exception. There's some real heroes of mine here that have been huge inspirations.
Well, really enjoy the rest of your time here. Thanks so much for sharing all that with
Cheers.
us. And huge congratulations on the order.
Thank you.
Brilliant film. Thanks so much.